Chris, we're here again tonight. You're back, so everybody is obviously very excited that I'm not just going to talk to myself for 15 minutes. Although I think I did pretty well.
I'm sure.
You can ask the finers and Teresa, Lisa, they can let you know. But
Mark Feiner says thumbs up. So good job, man.
good. I won't joke about whether or not he's lying. So we're reading and reflecting on the plan. God's got this, and we talked about this a little bit, but there were kind of 5 different aspects to the plan this week. For the 5 different days, and I think they were separated really well. What stood out to you as you were reading through that plan?
So it's interesting. I've made a couple notes. I don't always make notes, but sometimes in my old age, it helps.
I saw that. I was really impressed.
Yeah, I know, right? That's crazy. So I noted a few things, but I'm gonna just mention each of them, and then I'm gonna say what I think stood out to me maybe the most this week. The first day the emphasis was on crying out to God, and I thought it was cool that it had both like the cry out for help, like you see in the Psalms a lot,
right?
But it also cry out like in worship, at the heart of worship. So it addressed both of those things, which I thought was really smart and really, really good. Second day, fear not. Go back to that in a second. Third day, stand firm. Then the fourth day, I wrote down, be strong and courageous. That was part of it, but that wasn't the only part of it. It was like more like God has a place for you. He's prepared a spot for you.
Yeah.
And then the last one was be silent. And I also wrote next to that, then be still. Two of these things, all these things stood out in a certain respect because fear not, stand firm, and God prepares a place for you. We've had sermon series on these exact topics in the last, I'm going to say 3 years probably, where Pastor has really unpacked greatly, fear not and stand firm. So it was good to revisit that and be reminded of those things. But the thing that stood out to me of all the things this past week was crying out to God. Now, and especially the sort of crying out for help, emotive one, because I really resonate, won't surprise anybody, but I really resonate with crying out in a worship sense.
Right.
Right. And we don't really use in normal everyday language, we don't talk about crying out really at all. If your foot got run over, then you would cry out, right? But otherwise, we're not thinking about that. But that was a way that the psalmist commanded his own soul, right? Cry out to the Lord.
Yeah.
And God sort of requests that we reach out to him for that kind of urgency, I guess I would say. He wants to help us in every aspect of our lives. And I think so many times we have that position in our heart of like, well, I got it from here, God. Right? As if something were simple, like maybe you're at work and you're just like, well, I got it. I know what to do from here.
Yeah.
And it's only in those really desperate times when you might even think about crying out to God. But I think the note for us here is that should be a normal attitude. Maybe you're not weeping and wailing and freaking out, but you're asking God for help.
Right.
Constantly.
Everything, right?
Everything. Yeah.
What is it for you that when you think about this cry out, what is it for you that prevents that?
Oh man, that exact attitude of I know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. Or sometimes I don't even know what to do, but it's like, well, I'll just do some research and find out what to do. Or I'll look at what somebody else did, or I'll look what I did before. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm relying on any tool except God speaking to it.
Okay.
Which is just ridiculous, right?
So so for me that day, the first, second, and fifth day stood out to me, and like yeah, they were
Okay.
all good this week. I could talk about it any
Mhm.
day, but the cry out one probably specifically because I start wondering why don't I cry out more often,
Mhm.
right? There's lots of hard aspects about life. There's lots of confusing things about life, and way too often my first reaction is not, I wonder what God says about this, right?
Nice.
And
Yeah.
I think about so the lesson was really helpful for me because it talked about how the Israelites first they cried out to Moses, their leader,
Right.
and then maybe they even cried out against Moses, their leader. Um,
Yeah.
but crying out to your leader isn't the same thing as crying out to God, right? Crying out to
Right.
a mentor, crying out to a discipler, right, isn't the same thing as crying out to God.
Right.
And so what gets in my way of crying out to God, and why don't I do that more often? And I think, David talked about it too, right? In terms of like everything, right? Before I'm going to go to battle, before I'm going to do this, before I'm going to make that decision, right? How am I going to pursue and see if this is what God kind of wants, right?
Yeah.
If I'm having a tough time in, being a dad, right? And I'm super impatient. Why would I not cry out to God? Right? If
Yeah.
I am, feeling like I need motivation at work, why would I not cry out to God? Why would I? But I know the answer is because I want to be God. I want to fix it myself. I don't want to admit that I need help, because if I don't need help, then I'm more awesome, you know? And
And you think sometimes it's that, but I think about this too. Let's flip the flip the scene for a second.
yeah,
Think about a time when you do cry out to God. And why is it safe or why is it okay in that moment? And I'm going to follow up with, I know that one of the places that I'm more inclined to do that is in the car,
mm-hmm.
right? If I'm struggling with something, but I'm in the car and I'm like in my
Good
own
point.
sound bubble, right?
Yeah.
And nobody can really hear me. And if people see me at a stoplight or whatever, I don't care because I probably won't see them again, you know? And so I might pray out loud, cry out to God in that moment. And I'm not very self-conscious there.
Okay, can I add to this?
Do it.
This is a little bit of a funny story. So a while ago, when I lived with roommates in this house, and one of my roommates, his girlfriend was over, but I didn't know that. Okay, so I'm in the basement doing my devotional time, and it was one of those kind of times where I'm just like, I want to really get into it. And so I'm reading the Bible out loud,
Yeah.
right? To like talk to myself a little bit. So I'm reading these stories out loud and with passion, right? And the answer, going back to your question, right? Where do you do it? I felt safe at home,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes like for my devotional time, and I'll play the guitar and I'll do different things. And this is a good point. I didn't think about this, that I might not feel safe doing around other people, right? And so maybe I
Right.
don't cry out to God because I don't want to look weak in front of other people. But it was really funny because she told him later or something like that, and she's like, just thought I was crazy, just talking to myself in the basement. So
Right.
it was pretty funny. That was pretty funny. But
So I used to
that's a good
serve
point.
with, I used to serve with a pastor who sort of emphasized this. It was more of a charismatic church, and he wasn't afraid to. He would say, "Lift your voice." Sometimes, and it was a smaller church, but most people would do this,
Hmm.
right? So they would lift their voice. They would cry out to God.
Yeah,
Sometimes it was in celebration. Sometimes it was in travail. It just depended. But he gave permission from the pulpit and participated,
yeah.
right? Now, I'm not saying our pastors should do that exactly. But what I'm saying is, I think there was a difference in that community with permission
Yeah.
versus in our sanctuary. That would be very unusual,
So
and we don't do it because no one else is doing it, and there isn't that first step where somebody says, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to lift my voice to God." It has to be so orderly right here sometimes.
that's a good that's a really good point. And I'm glad you said it, because it's easy to be hard on yourself, I think. So like in my book, in my like my first example even, or reasoning for saying it, that it's because I want to be God. That is definitely true at times,
Mhm.
but I'm sure plenty of times too. It's just that, like, I don't feel comfortable, right?
Right.
This has been funny since COVID, since we wear masks in worship. I belt out when I worship because
Hmm.
nobody's going to hear me. And I want to belt out. Like I want to sing loud. Um, and sometimes I can make myself do that at other times, but it's easier to cry out physically
Yeah.
when you're feeling safe, right? I
Now,
do
now
wish
let's
I'd
think.
just cry out more, even in silence, right? And just be like my first turn, like if Kira's
Right.
there and I'm exhausted, why don't I just stop and be like, God, please just help me, please. And in prayer, often it's still not my reaction, but
Man, so okay, I got two real quick anecdotes with that. One, the very first pastor I ever served with, so this is going way back, told a sermon one time where the church was growing and they had to modify the parking lot, and it was literally him out there with a bunch of guys from the church, and they're digging up signposts and doing all kinds of things. Well, they're going to move like a no parking sign. And so he's out there himself with a shovel and he's
yeah,
digging around this no parking sign and he's just and he can't get it to move and he's like pull, 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 whatever. And he's just mumbling under his breath and doing all the things that you and I would do,
uh huh,
right? Not budging, not doing a darn thing. And he's just after some half hour, he stops and he's like, oh, God, would you just help me move this thing? And just in disgust, he takes his gloves off and he grabs his Mountain Dew and he leans on the sign. Exactly. Lisa's laughing. As soon as he leans on the sign, it goes pop right out of the ground. And he's like, okay, I get it.
I get it.
Right. Well, I remember that sermon even now. It's been 20 years or something,
Yeah,
because that's exactly the reality of it. I mean, is God miraculously going to move obstacles every time? No. But if you ask God for help, what can happen?
yeah,
What can happen?
and why? I mean, I guess no matter what, it's probably the best choice, right? I
Yeah.
mean, he seems to know what he's doing, and he seems to have a little bit of power, right? Hence the resurrection of the dead and speaking the world into existence.
Right.
And so it seems that even if the answer is going to be, hey, I'm going to let you figure this one out on yourself, you might as well still cry out, you
Oh,
know,
for sure.
and I think especially since he asks us to, right? He's like,
Hmm.
come with all these things. Interesting. Did you have any thoughts on the other days that you wanted to touch on? Because I don't want to.
I mean, I
We can stay here. We even said we could easily stay on this one the
we
whole
could,
time.
and the other one, honestly, that I could stay on, which is ironic, but I can stay on Be Still. I could do that for a week and a half.
What's your what? Why does that one stand out to you next?
Because it's a command, right? And I mean, we want to speak against our fear not. We want to speak against our doubts and our squeamishness and our faith. Stand firm. Um, if you preach at somebody, be still. Spend quiet time with God. Nobody has any patience for that, and I'm painting with a broad brush, and I understand that. But I'm going to tell this group what I tell people all the time: waiting
Yeah.
is an activity. It's not a waste of time, and it's not something that you do when you're bored and you don't know what else to do. Waiting is a purposeful activity. And that's what this is. Be still and know, right? That's what the psalm says. Be still and know that I am God.
Hmm.
That's actually two parts. Be still. In other words, just be quiet.
Right.
And then know that I'm God. If you just meditate on that, know that I am God, you're going to learn some stuff. And I don't care if you do it for 5 minutes. I don't care if you do it for 30 minutes. I've known people who could sustain that for even longer. Be still is key to letting God speak into your life.
It's interesting because that's a huge. Is sometimes you don't want to reason out the why behind everything that God says, right? Because it's dangerous, and it
Yeah.
leads you to ultimately being able to say, I'll do the things that I understand, and
Yep.
and I won't do the things I don't understand. But it is interesting to see the possible benefits of just being still, right? I think, man, this one is tough. I'll say two things. I had somebody before who told me, he said something like, I can tell how strong someone's faith is by how much entertainment they need.
Yeah,
right?
man.
How much do they need to distract their mind? Hence, their faith potentially being weaker, them being less confident, less secure, less whatever. And I wouldn't necessarily say that's true, but if you're unable to be still, there might be an issue, and that might be that one, you think you can do it yourself, right? So, I better get to work because I need to do this. And I think a lot of times you realize, and one of the conversations that came up last week was, what about those people who we love who don't know Jesus, right? And it's like, well, I want to be active on that, but I also want to realize that God changes hearts.
Right?
So I want to trust him to do that. And I want to pray and be still and reflect and being aware that he's the only one who's really going to make these changes. Right. And so I want to follow him.
Yeah.
And then also just that it gives you the time to honestly reflect on who he is. Right. Like there are times where I have a really tough time reading the Bible because it motivates me to want to go out and do something.
Yep.
Well, the best thing might be for me to just sit there and reflect on how great God is in really intricate, meaningful ways. And I miss out on that if I just go out and start doing.
Yeah. Yeah. If some people, do, and it's got a biblical example, but it's not what God told you to do. So it's not an ungodly thing to do.
Right.
It's just not what God said for you to do.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And so then we go back to obedience is better than sacrifice. Well, then how do you know what to obey? Listen to God.
Listen to God.
So watch how these things, I'm going to tie it up real quick because I know we got to go. Watch how these things work in the life of one of our favorite people, David. Okay? Be still and know is what he did while he was on the hillside before he was even done being a shepherd boy.
Mm-hmm.
He spent his quiet time with God, alone on a hillside, occasionally fighting off predators, but generally spending time with God, making up songs.
Interesting.
Okay? Now, later on, they have a victory and he's an adult and he's dancing in the street pretty much in his underwear. Okay?
Yep.
He is crying out to God. Now, he's the one writing in the Psalms, cry out to God this way, cry out to God that way. Basically, in all situations, cry out to God. Now they have a victory. He goes dancing in the street and he just in his skivvies. And his wife, of all people, comes out and says, how dignified is the king in his underwear dancing in the street? And his reply to her is, I'll be less dignified than this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of God.
Right.
So be still and know it takes you to a place where you're uninhibited in front of God. So the antidote for us being all clammed up in worship is to be still and know.
Yes.
Right?
No, I'm with you, man. Good thought. Good thought. As always. Thank you, Chris.
God is good.
God is good.